Well, Washington goes into 2023 as one of the favorites in the Pac-12, and they've got high expectations up there in Montlake. And the spring game, and more than one way, showed you why.
Our Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today features myself, as it kind of always does. It's part of our arrangement here. And today it features Roman Tomashoff, who writes about the Huskies up in Seattle for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. We bring him on. He's our Washington guy. Many of you asked for quite a while, hey, can you find a Washington person like your commentary, but can you find a Washington person? Roman's our guy. We love having him on. Roman, we'll just get right into it. How was the spring game kind of received up there in Seattle in terms of what you saw and who stood out?
So I'm not going to lie, Spencer, the expectations of what we saw during the spring game, the expectations and the reality of the spring game were two totally different things. Because as someone who was at every single practice, the entirety of the spring was, this offense is cooking. This offense is just so much better than everybody else. Roma Dunze, all spring has been on another level. And then early on in the spring game, it was the defense. The defense with the weird scoring system that UW uses for the spring game actually jumped out to a 25-0 lead.
Smoking them.
Yeah, it was wild. There were a lot of there was a couple of 3-and-outs. There were some sacks, some pressures, a couple of picks, including one that definitely would have been a pick six had it not been blown dead instantly to just, save everybody from injury. So that was like the big thing was, whoa, is this defense better than we've seen all spring, or what's going on here? There was a lot of pressure. And one of the big things that, was probably the biggest question coming into the spring was, how is the secondary look? After just last year where, there were some issues. Let's be gentle. Just say there were some issues. And they looked a lot better. On the second drive of the game, Javion Green had an interception that would have gone back to the house off of Dylan Morris, where he made a great read on the ball. Morris just didn't even see him, and Javion just came across and took it. And he's really been one of the standout guys in the spring who played as a true freshman last year. Spencer is an Oregon fan. I'm sure you remember Troy Franklin cooking him for a touchdown in that game. And a couple members of the coaching staff admitted on the record that they played him before he was ready, because there were just a lot of injuries and they just felt that they needed a guy to step up. And he played well in spurts, but there were definitely some points where you could tell that he was not ready to play. And over the course of the winter and the spring, his teammates and the coaching staff have just been raving about just how much bigger and better he's gotten, and just the leaps that he's taken, not only on the field, but just kind of in the film room and in the weight room, and just the player that he looks like now. So he was definitely one of the biggest revelations of the game, I would say. And along with Jabbar Muhammad, the transfer from Oklahoma State, who made a couple of nice tackles and is just a super fluid mover. It looks like the cornerback spot is going to be locked down. And that's without even mentioning a guy who's probably going to be the starter opposite of Jabbar Muhammad in Elijah Jackson, who had the other interception on the day on what was not Michael Penix's best throw, as he definitely would be the first to admit. And yeah, it looks like the secondary has a chance to make a major jump forward this season.
Yeah, and that'd be huge for Washington as well. And I almost think for the Huskies, it makes you feel more encouraged that the defense was kind of outperforming the offense there, because look, spring football is an imperfect way to get an idea of where the team is at, because you don't always have all the ones there. You don't have all the true freshmen there. You have guys moving around and whatnot. But if you're Washington, I would rather see, explosive impact plays from the defense than from the offense all the time, because I know what the offense is most likely going to be, right? So let's go over to that side of the ball. what did you see kind of big picture from the offense, including Michael Penix, who's, going to have some preseason Heisman hype as the nation's leading passer from a season ago, back for his 5th year of college football. I think expectations for him and the offense are understandably pretty high. And he's got an elite receiving core, of course, led by Roman Tomashoff, who looks, as you mentioned, really, really good. So what was it all bad for the offense, or were there some things where you went, oh, okay, yeah, no, this is still going to be the offense that we saw from a season ago?
Oh no, it still definitely feels like it's going to be the offense that we saw last season, where one guy that has been dealing with some injuries this spring didn't really get a chance to play is the guy that most members of the media have been kind of penciling in as the number 1 running back in Mississippi State transfer Dylan Johnson. He sat out the last couple of weeks with an injury he sustained during the end of his time at Mississippi State, where we got to see him for a little while, and oh man, that dude just looks different. And there's a lot to be excited about there. And one thing that kind of has been a little bit of the case this spring is Michael Penix and the rest of the offense just needed a little bit of time to get into rhythm before everything just started clicking and clicking and clicking. There was a play a couple drives into the game where he hit Giles Jackson for an over-the-shoulder, about 35-yard dime that he made that throw, just that kind of throw, once or twice per practice. And just once he made that throw, it was full go. Everything looked so much better from that point on, where sometimes it just takes a little bit of time for him to find a rhythm, which is fine. That's something that, some quarterbacks just need to see it, and then they can keep going off of there. So I would say that the offense as a whole looked really great. A couple guys that I particularly wanted to highlight. First is redshirt freshman Denzel Boston, who is a dude that the coaching staff and everybody else in the wide receiver room has been hyping up. He didn't come into UW with a lot of just hype around him, but the guy's 6'3", 210 pounds or so, and he just changes the game whenever he's on the field, man. He can stretch it. There was actually a botched play. He scored 2 touchdowns on the day. One of them was about a 40-yarder through the air. The other one was a bit of a botched play where he was still supposed to get the ball. He was coming across the formation on a fly sweep and actually took a direct snap and then ran it into the end zone from 5 yards out. And when Kalen DeBoer was asked about it after the game, he was like, yeah, that's not how we were planning to get the ball into his hands, but it worked, right? And that was something that we all love to see, because he was somebody who has gotten a lot of hype, played a little bit last year as a true freshman. And it was just something where anytime you saw him on the field, it was just kind of like, whoa, okay, we can see why people are talking about this dude. He's been awesome all spring.
Yeah, no, and the weapons are just numerous there. You highlight Penix at quarterback and Nunze at wide receiver, as we said, but there are other guys. I mean, I watched Polk last year make a bunch of big explosive plays. He was awesome against Michigan State. He had, 100 some odd yards in
3 touchdowns.
That game. Yeah, and a couple touchdowns. Like there's almost an embarrassment of riches at the receiver position. But if an offense is going to click, you've got to have one other component up there that I'll ask Roman about after I tell you all about Built Bars, which is what you need to have if you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and calories. You need the best tasting protein bar ever. That's Built. You got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make a healthier snack choice consistently, then you have to go get Built Bars. They're healthy. They taste amazing. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. It is delicious. It melts if you warm it up a little. I don't do that on purpose, but when it's in my golf bag and it's a warm day out, sometimes it's a little bit melty. And guess what? I eat it anyway because it tastes great. 4 grams of sugar, 130 calories with 17 grams of protein. You can get a bar. You can get a puff. They're both outstanding. Go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club while you can to get your favorite flavors. You can also get specialty flavors at built.com. Walmart, Sam's Club, built.com. Go get your next order of Built Bars today. You can thank me later in the meantime.
You gotta send me some of those Built Bars, man. They're great.
They are indeed fantastic. So one group that might want to bulk up with said Built Bars, generally speaking, is the offensive line, right? That's how you transition from
I respect that. Hats off to you.
Right into the topic, right? Just segue into it. So this is a Washington offensive line. I think that was kind of underrated last year. They were really, really good. And I think that they might have been a touch underrated because when you're throwing the ball, you're talking about the quarterback, you're talking about the receivers, right? You and I have been doing it on this very podcast.
Yep.
Quarterback, receivers. But last year, Michael Penix was able to get the ball to receivers, and Ryan Grubb was able to call whatever he wanted to, because Michael Penix, who has some mobility, but I don't think we'd describe, especially after some ACL injuries, as a hypermobile quarterback, he had a lot of time to throw the football and give his receivers time to go downfield and have those long developing pass plays that turned into explosive ones for Washington. This is an offensive line that loses Jackson Kirkland, who is going to be playing very soon here in the NFL. He'll get drafted probably in the mid rounds or so. I think probably third round at the earliest. We'll see, but he looks like that caliber of player. But when you lose someone who was that important of a piece to the offensive line, Roman, how do you assess, how they're replacing that position and also how the offensive line looks overall?
So that's a really good question. The first thing that comes to mind is Jackson Kirkland did not play in the first 3 games last year. First 2. I think he played a little bit in the Michigan State game. But the guy who took his spot is going to be back in Nate Kalepo. Nate Kalepo looked awesome last year. Another really big body, similar to Jags, about 6'6", 340. And he's somebody who looked awesome during his time last year and should just be a steady replacement. Same with Mateo Mele, who's going to be taking over for Corey Luciano at center. A guy who's got a lot of experience and should be somebody that the offense can rely on rather quickly to just get everything up to speed and be a similar player to what Luciano was last season. And then the only spot there that there's kind of a battle at right now would be the other guard spot. It looks like it's going to be left guard, but it's kind of interchangeable there, and I'm sure we might see some more experimenting from the coaching staff going into the fall. Is between Julius Buelow and Jaron Hatchett. Both of them were 4-star prospects, both just very different body types. Buelow is more your prototypical tackle, but with Troy Fautanu and Roger Rosengart returning at tackle, they're not moving. Both those guys are going to be very high NFL draft picks over the next couple of years. So it's between those two at guard, and Hatchett is a very fluid mover. He's a little bit smaller, as Buelow's a solid 6'8", 320, something like that. He's just a massive individual. So there's a little bit of a battle there. Hatchett, the one thing that Hatchett brings that is a little bit of an advantage over what Buelow does is he's way better in the run game, in my opinion. A lot of his tape showed him just being able to get out in front of blocks and just kind of be that lead blocker to rely upon when you want to stretch the field, run outside the tackles. He's that guy that can do that very well for you. So that's going to be the one position of interest kind of going into the fall up front. But outside of that, Michael Penix only got sacked 5 times last season. And while there's a lot of talent up front, some credit needs to be given to Ryan Grubb and his scheme. He's got an offensive line coach background. So he's somebody that definitely helped things a lot once he got in the door. And I think there's really no reason to expect that offensive line to fall off this season.
Do you feel like it's in a place where they can replicate that production from last year, or at least most of it, to allow the offense to operate the same way that it did?
I do think so, because these are guys that not only have been in the program for a couple of years and kind of understand what's going to be asked of them,
been in the weight room too.
And yes, in the weight room, they've like their bodies have changed drastically over the past 2 years. But it's also something where all of these guys are super talented. Every single player that I just mentioned, outside of Mateo Mele, was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. So these are all guys that were blue chip prospects that had offers to go anywhere they wanted. All of them decided to come to Montlake, and they're all super talented guys. And to be honest, a lot of that's a little bit of a step up from what there were last year. Jackson Kirkland was a talented guy, but he's a 3-star recruit. Same with Corey Luciano, who's coming out of a junior college. That's not knocking those guys at all. But when you think about what kind of talent is still in the offensive line room, these are the kind of guys where if you expect to win the Pac-12 and you expect to get to the college football playoff and compete for a national championship, these are the kinds of guys that you need to perform. So that's kind of where you don't really expect to drop off, is because these are a lot of really talented individuals up front.
One thing that a spring game is really good for fans and media people who don't get to watch, every single snap of practice. Obviously, you're there all the time. If you're a Husky fan, you don't follow Roman on Twitter, you should, at rtomashoff34. Posts a bunch of great clips and just kind of insight of what's going down up there in Seattle on a daily basis. But you still don't get to see everything. But in the spring game, you get to see a lot of what the coaches see on a daily basis, right? How is this position group battle playing out? How is this guy performing? How's this true freshman adapting? How's this transfer look like? All that sort of stuff. I think it provides a great window. So I wanted to go through with you, Roman, and let's pick 3 guys here who you feel like, based on their spring game performance, have earned either an increased amount of playing time compared to what you maybe expected for them going into the spring game and now entering next year, or, maybe there are some freshmen who come in and really started to pop. So who might those 3 guys be?
So I'm going to exclude some of the guys that I talked about earlier, because I would definitely include Denzel Boston, Javion Green on that list. But the great thing about the spring game is we got to see a little bit of everybody. So there are many people that I can talk about. The first one that I want to talk about is Sioux Falls transfer Zach Durfee. He's an edge rusher, former quarterback coming out of high school.
You say former quarterback?
I did say former quarterback. Yes,
he's a edge rusher.
Yeah, 6'4", 250-pound quarterback. Yes, you did hear me correctly.
We're in an era of college football where we have a lot of firsts. We have a lot of new things. I mean, now guys are transferring the day after they play in the spring game and get fans excited. Like Montana Lamonius Craig at Colorado. I don't think I've ever heard of the quarterback to edge rusher switch. I've seen quarterback to running back. I've seen quarterback to receiver. I've seen quarterback to safety. Edge rusher?
Yeah.
That's what offense was he running at Sioux Falls?
So no, he played defensive line when he got to Sioux Falls. He was a high school quarterback.
Okay, gotcha.
So he redshirted. Man. It's still wild. He redshirted 2021. Came out in 2022 and was a super productive guy there. Like, I highly recommend watching his film. It's because it's kind of like, oh, okay, this guy from Sioux Falls, NII. All right, I really don't know what to expect going into this. You watch it, you're like, oh. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of background here that was talked about a little bit over the course of the spring. Durfee is incredibly explosive. Guy has a 10.6 broad and a 35.5-inch vertical jump. This is a 6'4", 250-pound former quarterback. The guy just shows insane burst off the edge. He's strong. He can set the edge against the run when needed. He had a sack in the spring game where I can't remember who he beat, but he was in the quarterback at a snap. Like, the ball was snapped and the play was over because he was already there. And he's one dude who, over the course of the spring, has just flashed again and again and again. And if he can show that he can put it together consistently at a Power 5 level, he's going to be a hyper productive edge rusher at this level. And it's just kind of wild to think about what kind of journey it's been for him.
And he'd enter a position group that is already looking like the unquestioned strength of that Washington defense and was a year ago, being the front four, specifically the edge positions. You've got Braylon Trice back. You've got Zion Tupuola-Fatui back. So is he kind of the number 3 guy in that rotation?
So I would say that right now it's kind of a battle between him and it's kind of the tweener in Voitanufi, who's another super productive edge rusher when asked to play that position, because he also plays defensive tackle. He's like a 6'1", 6'2", 260 pounds. So he's really a tweener where he's gotten a lot of good pressure when they line him up inside. But Kalen DeBoer admitted that they're trying to play him outside a little bit more over the course of the spring and the fall. He was injured for a good portion of the spring and didn't necessarily get a ton of snaps on the edge, but that's somebody who might also fit into that group as well. As well as redshirt sophomore now, Maurice Himes, who is another just massive, just physically imposing talent. Former 3-star who originally is from Germany and is just hyper athletic dude who, when he puts it all together, he's going to look like somebody we talked about a little bit before the show, where if it all comes together, he can be that Laiatu Latu kind of just player with the size and athleticism that he possesses.
Gotcha. All right. So moving on, 2 more guys who you feel like really stood out, and in your view and perhaps in the coach's view as well, you feel like earned some playing time in the spring game.
Yeah, so the next one that I really wanted to highlight is another transfer, former Michigan State wide receiver Germie Bernard, where most Husky fans know the story. He was committed to Washington. Then the whole Junior Adams thing happened, which we won't need to go into today. But that happened, and if you know what I'm talking about, decided to back out of his national letter of intent and went to Michigan State. After 1 year, said this isn't really for me, entered the portal with a do not contact designation, which is the first time I've ever seen that, and immediately came back to Washington because, as Kalen DeBoer had said, we tried to develop a relationship with him, but he wanted to do what's best for himself, which is totally fine, totally fair. That's what a lot of, college football is at this point in time. And there are certain words that I want to use, but as a media member, I'm going to remain professional and don't want to get ahead of myself. But if he were starting coming this fall, that's something that would not surprise me, even like with all the other wide receivers that are in this room.
Really?
He is big. He is strong. He is fast. He runs very crisp routes. He is just one of those dudes where he came in and you kind of got to take a good look at him up close, and you were just kind of like, oh, wow. There was at least one play of practice where he would just kind of body someone physically or just go up and make a spectacular catch. And you're just like, okay, yeah, this guy is going to be something. And he made a couple of those catches in the spring game and just looks like somebody that's going to be hyper productive there for a couple of years.
Yeah, that would be quite a statement if the coaching staff lined him up opposite Rome Odunze, and those were your top two wide receivers. If you came out in 12 personnel first play of the season this year against Boise State, right, is who Washington opens with. See, I got these Pac-12 schedules down pat. I do not have all 12 memorized, but I've got at least a decent idea. I'm pretty sure I could go off straight memory and tell you each team's biggest non-conference game. I respect that. That's a good start. I think that's a solid place to be. But if he were lining up against Boise with Roman Odunze, and then you throw Polk in there, and you throw I forgot the name of the running back transfer that you mentioned
Dylan
as
Johnson.
well. Yeah, Dylan Johnson. Like that's an array of weapons that kind of lines up, as long as the offensive line holds up as it did a year ago, for kind of a repeat production season, it would seem.
Absolutely. So I will stop you, and I will say that if he were to start, it would definitely be over Jalen Polk, not Jalen McMillan. But either way, just making that statement, just being able to come in and unseat a guy like that who is also incredibly productive.
Yeah.
And again, it's not knocking anybody else, but it's just speaking to how talented everybody in that room is, and especially how talented Germie Bernard is and what he's shown since he's gotten to Washington, that it's just incredibly impressive. And the only term I can really think of is eye-popping.
Yeah, no, I think that, McMillan and Polk, both really, really talented wideouts. And if that's your group of four, that seems like a pretty darn good group of four to have. I think if you're Michael Penix and thinking about who you're going to be throwing the ball to this fall, I always refer to Jalen Polk as just Polk, because in my mind, I'm just worried that I'm just going to subconsciously call him Chris Polk.
I love me some Chris Polk, man. Man.
I remember that guy so clearly, and I know if I say a first name at some point in time, that is going to pop into my head, because I remember him. I remember that era of college football quite well. So finally, Roman, one more guy who really stood out to you in the spring game that you think earned some playing time.
Yeah, so first I want to say that it's definitely easier to go that route than to go Jalen and Jalen, because then there's just a whole
right, because then you're crossing them up.
Exactly. So the last guy that I really wanted to highlight is someone who has just really stood out all spring and stood out a lot last year as a true freshman, and that's Javon Parker. Javon Parker is a 3-star defensive tackle out of Michigan, who is a late recruit, somebody that him and his twin brother Armon came in for an official visit and committed not long after Kalen DeBoer and the rest of his staff got to campus. And while Armon, who's actually reported to be the better player among the two on their high school film, hasn't played yet as due to an ACL injury that he suffered before he got to campus. Javon, man, he just looks like a different kind of player. Like there aren't a lot of 300-pounders with abs, and Javon Parker is one of them. And he's got pictures posted on Twitter to prove it. And it's just kind of wild to think about. And he recorded a sack last year in the Apple Cup, and it just looks like he is going to continue to produce And you talked about the edge group being arguably the best part of the Washington defense. If they can continue to get pressure from the interior and a guy like that steps up and somebody like Fatui Tuitele takes the leap as a pass rusher and just gets more consistent pressure from the interior, the ceiling is the roof, to quote Michael Jordan, as to how high this UW pass rush can fly, assuming just, everything else stays consistent, because getting consistent pressure from the interior breaks down an offensive line quicker than anything else. And Javon Parker is a guy who, while he probably won't start, is definitely going to be a very big part of the rotation this season, and is somebody that Husky fans should be very, very excited about coming into the season.
Roman Tomashoff covers Washington for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. You can check him out on Twitter at rtomashoff34. Roman, good to talk to you as always, checking up on the team up in Seattle. Thanks, Roman.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time as always. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.